stand by for action.
Thanks for joining me. My name's Dave Milner. Welcome to this special edition of The Unpleasant Blind Guy. I know some of you may be expecting election analysis, and for some of you it's going to be a relief to know that you're not going to hear it this time. Instead, I'm going to play you the first part of a special Remembrance Day, Veterans Day edition of the English Defense League radio show. Our show's host, Jeff Mitchell, was unable to host the program on Sunday, November the 11th, 2018. So, Jan Rennie of the Christian Defense League and myself recorded this special program on Friday, November the 9th, to commemorate not only the 100th anniversary of the armistice that ended the First World War, but our veterans past and still living as well. And remember, you'll be able to find reference documents for this program at UBG Contact on Twitter, and I'm available other places on social media. I'm Dave Milner on Facebook, the Tea Party Community and MeWe, and a Magador on the newly restored Gab. Now we begin the special Remembrance Day, Veterans Day edition of the English Defense League radio show.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. I hope, indeed I pray, that we shall not be found unworthy of our victory if after toil and tribulation it is granted to us. For the rest, we have to gain the victory. That is our task. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
We shall not fail or falter. We shall not weaken or tire. Neither the sudden shock of battle nor the long-drawn trials of vigilance and exertion will wear us down. Give us the tools, and we will finish the job.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the English Defense League radio show. I'm a poor substitute for our host, Jeff Mitchell, but Jeff has been hospitalized with COPD, breathing problems, and he is unable to talk for very long right now. This show is being broadcast on Sunday, but it's being recorded on Friday because I have with me the real host of the show, Jan Rennie, and we're going to go through some articles and talk about the Remembrance Day and Veterans Day in the United States, and these coincide this Sunday on the 100th anniversary of the armistice, the end of World War I, which was a brutal conflict that not enough people really know that much about, and they should, because it shaped the way war was fought thereafter. And with that, I'd like to bring in Jan Rennie. Hello, Jan.
Hello, Dave. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're basically the host today because this is the English Defense League radio show, and I know that Jeff would want for the team to be together, but this is about Remembrance Day primarily, and that means that that you're on the hot seat today.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Get well soon, Jeff. We have missed you.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
Jeff, I just want to say, if you look on my Facebook page, when you can get on Facebook, you will see a post from me talking about how you were coming home. Every time I check that thing, there are more and more and more supportive responses for you. I think you'll enjoy reading it, Jeff. We love you, we miss you, and we know that you're with us in spirit doing this show.
Most certainly, yes.
What we'd like to do, people, we would like to just give you an overview of World War I because there are so many people that don't know about it. And I'm going to take this from an article from the History Channel. It's fairly complete, but it was such a long and complicated struggle that we can only do it so much justice. So here we go. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the Great War ended at 5 a.m. That morning, Germany, bereft of manpower and supplies, and faced with imminent invasion, signed an armistice agreement with the Allies in a railroad car outside Compiègne, France. The First World War left 9 million soldiers dead and 21 million wounded, with Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, France, and Great Britain each losing nearly 1 million or more lives. In addition, at least 5 million civilians died from disease, starvation, or exposure. On July the 28th, 1914, an event that is widely regarded as sparking the outbreak of World War I, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was shot to death with his wife by Bosnian Serb Gavrilo Princip in Sarajevo, Bosnia. Ferdinand had been expecting his uncle's imperial armed forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina, despite the threat of Serbian nationalists who wanted these Austro-Hungarian possessions to join newly independent Serbia. Austria-Hungary blamed the Serbian government for the attack and hoped to use the incident as justification for settling the problem of Slovak nationalism once and for all. However, as Russia supported Serbia, an Austro-Hungarian declaration of war was delayed until its leaders received assurances from German leader Kaiser Wilhelm II that Germany would support their cause in the event of a Russian intervention. Now, as I scroll down, guys, you can see here that it already just becomes a complicated furball. It was a set of alliances that had, Jan, really begun in the 19th century, and this was just a culmination of them. I don't need, Jan, to tell you that during the 19th century, a lot of the European powers, Great Britain included, wove themselves together in a web of alliances, and that's really, in my opinion, where this came from.
Yes, I think so too. Maybe their forces amalgamated for the war.
That was part of it. It started with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo, and then because everybody was allies with everybody else, it just snowballed from there.
Right.
Famously, they asked the Kaiser how he thought the war started once it was all over, and he said, if we only knew. So even the Kaiser didn't know at the time what really started the war.
There's lots of mention of Austria-Hungary, and back in the First World War, they had the German Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and of course the Russian Empire, which was amalgamation of different countries, I presume, that don't exist anymore. Maybe some of the UK, we have still got the Commonwealth, part of it. But things were very different back then.
Yes, they were. And now we'll continue with the article. On July the 28th, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the tenuous peace between Europe's great powers collapsed. On July the 29th, Austro-Hungarian forces began to shell the Serbian capital, Belgrade, and Russia, Serbia's ally, ordered a troop mobilization against Austria-Hungary. France, allied with Russia, began to mobilize on August the 1st. France and Germany declared war against each other on August the 3rd. After crossing through neutral Luxembourg, the German army invaded Belgium on the night of August 3-4, prompting Great Britain, Belgium's ally, to declare war against Germany. As you can see, guys, as I scroll down, this was just a bunch of diplomatic dominoes and alliances falling into place and taking a lot of countries and people with it. Now, for the most part, the people of Europe greeted the outbreak of war with jubilation. Quite different from today, by the way. Most particularly assured that their country would be victorious within months of the initial belligerence. Germany was most prepared for the outbreak of hostilities, and its military leaders had formatted a sophisticated military strategy known as the Schiffen Plan, which envisioned the conquest of France through a great arcing offensive through Belgium and into northern France. Russia, slow to mobilize, was to be kept occupied by Austro-Hungarian forces while Germany attacked France. The Schiffen Plan was nearly successful, but in early September, the French rallied and halted the German advance at the bloody Battle of the Marne River near Paris. By the end of 1914, well over 1 million soldiers of various nationalities had been killed on the battlefields of Europe, and neither the Allies nor the Central Powers was a final victory in sight. On the Western Front, the battle line that stretched across northern France and Belgium, the combatants settled down in the trenches for a terrible war of attrition. And as I scroll down, guys, you hear just horrific stories about trench warfare. And this is where it started. Actually, this is where it started in Europe. Actually, the strategy of using trenches began in the American Civil War towards the end as defensive measures. And there were people from nation-states in Europe that were there observing that war, and also there looking the land over in case the United States was to collapse into more than one country. But they got the idea of trench warfare from that conflict, mostly. Now, in 1915, the Allies attempted to break the stalemate with an amphibious invasion of Turkey, which had joined the Central Powers in October of 1914, but after heavy bloodshed, the Allies were forced to retreat in early 1916. The year 1916 saw great offensives by Germany and Britain along the Western Front, but neither side accomplished a decisive victory. In the East, Germany was more successful, and the disorganized Russian army suffered terrible losses, spurring the outbreak of the Russian Revolution in 1917. By the end of 1917, the Bolsheviks had seized power in Russia and immediately set about negotiating peace with Germany. In 1918, the infusion of American troops and resources into the Western Front finally tipped the scale in the Allies' favor. Germany signed an armistice agreement with the Allies on November the 11th, 1918. World War I was known as the War to End All Wars because of the great slaughter and destruction it caused. Unfortunately, the peace treaty that officially ended the conflict, the Treaty of Versailles of 1919, forced punitive terms on Germany that destabilized Europe and laid the groundwork for World War II. All right, so that's that article. Now, Jan, you've got some figures of the number of dead by country. And
yes.
Folks, if you listen to this, you're going to be amazed. Jan, please go ahead.
It is quite amazing. The figures shocked me between each country. It shows just who was in the thick of battle and people who just wasn't. I'd just like to add that when we went to war, when the UK became involved in the war, or was about to, 6 million British men signed up. 3 million Brits actually went to war, and the number that died was 994,138. But I'll read you the list of. Let's start with Japan. These are the troops they lost, the people they lost that was in active service. Japan, 415. Denmark, 722. Sweden, 877. Newfoundland, 1,204. Norway, 1,892. Montenegro, missed out some words, 3,000. South Africa, 9,463. New Zealand, 18,050. Australia, 61,928. Canada, 66,944. The Indian Empire, 74,187. Portugal, 89,222. The USA, 117,465. Belgium, 120,637. Greece, 176,000. Bulgaria, 187,500. Romania, 680,000. Serbia, 725,000. United Kingdom, 994,138. Italy, 1,240,000. Austria-Hungary, 1,567,000. France, 1,697,800. The German Empire, 2,476,897. The Ottoman Empire, 2,921,844. The Russian Empire, 3,311,000. Amazing figures, Dave, don't you think? All those millions lost.
Oh, yes. Completely shocking. And it was all because of the web of alliances that was created. And I think the numbers were also because of some of the strategies that were employed. Because you had trench warfare, and at the same time, you had advances in technology which included more efficient artillery. And, of course, the machine gun, the Maxim gun, the Vickers gun, which was used by the UK, and, of course, on the smaller arms side than those, you had things like the pump shotgun, which was used by the Americans to ward off trench raids. And, of course, you had the Browning automatic rifle, which my grandfather used, actually, when he was in the war. And you also had gas, mustard gas, and they tried chlorine gas and other things. And this took a devastating toll on the regular soldiers in this war. So many countries had been using 19th century techniques to fight what was really a 20th century war. And that shows in the numbers of dead. And I really, personally, have a bit of a problem with some of the leadership on both sides, honestly, in that war, that they did not recognize this new technology and develop better strategies for fighting this conflict that might have resulted in the loss of fewer people. I mean, I don't know how you think about it, Jan, but that's just my personal opinion.
Well, Winston Churchill, at one point during the First World War, was, for the UK anyway, was in charge of munitions. He started off with the Admiralty. He became First Lord of the Admiralty. What year? I can't think. 1911, I think, because he was watching Germany and their building, a bit like we did in the Second World War.
Right.
He was watching Germany getting their manpower, their military together, and he knew that we hadn't got what you're saying, Dave. We hadn't got that military power. We hadn't got the weapons. We hadn't got the things that were needed like we had in the Second World War, and indeed now. When you look at the Falklands War, any man or woman, any man that got to the medical tent survived. No one died that was taken in there alive. They all survived, whether it be Brits or the others, Argentinians. Right. But that just shows what great medical people we had within the forces. But of course, Tony Blair, we didn't find this out for a while, but Tony Blair got rid of military hospitals in the UK, which also went with military doctors and nurses, and which is a backward step when you look at the First World War. I mean, in Stirling Castle, there is a big display. It's been there for years. There is a big display of First World War medical instruments. My God, they are so rudimentary. They are, for want of a better word, blunt. Obviously, the rusty look about them now is because of age, but you may as well have had a knife and fork. And these were men. I mean, these doctors that was out, there's no doubt when people signed up for the First World War, there was doctors amongst them and medical staff, obviously, to try and save a life just outside of a trench, if you like, get wounded people from the trenches to the medics in all that mud, and it's just beyond comprehension, isn't it?
It is, really. You know, what you're talking about is very relevant because at the start of World War I and through most of it, the technological advantage was on the side of the Central Powers, Germany and their allies. They had better aircraft. They had, well, for instance, they had one aircraft that was actually made in Holland that was just devastating as far as aircraft goes. And the only ones that could even come close were France. They were just behind them, technologically speaking. The UK did bring in tanks, but the Americans, the contribution that we made to the war, as far as technology goes, was, and again, like I said, the Browning automatic rifle and the pump shotgun. And in an odd twist of fate, Hiram Percy Maxim, I believe it was him that was trying to do that. He tried to sell his Maxim gun to the United States Army, the Maxim machine gun. He tried to sell that to the United States Army. They rejected it. So Maxim went over to Europe. And
did they use? Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Did they use the Gatling gun in the First World War in Europe?
The Gatling gun was old technology. It worked, and it worked well because it was simple, and a lot of people liked it. And after that, soon came a machine gun. If you guys want to look this up, it was called the potato digger. It was a little bit more automated. But the Maxim gun was better in that it could fire faster, and you could fire it with a little bit more accuracy. And variations on the Maxim gun were used all the way into World War II. And as I said, that was called the Vickers gun in the UK, because Maxim went around selling his machine guns to various other countries because the United States of America would not buy them. I'm not sure why our Army wouldn't buy them, but we came in at a disadvantage because of that. The best that we could do to counter it was the Browning automatic rifle, which was really an amazing weapon. I mean, the thing could actually shoot through walls. And it was also, I think, a better weapon because it was single-man carryable. With a Maxim gun, or a Vickers gun, you had to have a crew, because not only did you have to keep the thing fed with a belt, but you also had to keep it cool. If it's possible, I'll try and put a picture of the Maxim gun or the Vickers gun in the slides. But we have so many slides for the show that you may not see it. If you don't, just look it up. You'll see this, Jan, you've seen this before when you've seen movies and things about the war. It's that machine gun that has that big fat thing around the barrel. Now, that big fat thing was a water jacket. That's what they used to try and keep the barrel cool. You know, but everybody was playing the technology game because it was.
They're saying here, I'm just looking it up quickly.
Go ahead. Yeah.
That the machine gun was the most important weapon in the First World War.
I agree with that.
The development of automatic firearms was essential. So they took Maxim's gun and it discharged multiple bullets by simply activating a trigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And saying his innovation prompted wider development. Russia, Germany, and Britain used guns based on the Maxim system.
Yes, they did.
And France and Austria-Hungary used indigenous designs stolen. And they called their machine guns the Saint-Étienne and the Schwallosi.
Yes, there were some really bizarre-looking machine guns that were in use at the time. And this is why you had so many deaths, because the leadership, and again, this goes on every side, the leadership just didn't realize how devastating these weapons were. And they would send their men charging, this was a big thing over here, Jan, over the top.
Yeah.
Crawl out of those trenches and charge, And they were charging right into the teeth of these machine guns, that were just cutting them up. The only thing that comes close to what happened in World War I to soldiers, the only thing that comes close to that was the Battle of Little Round Top, which was part of the Battle of Gettysburg in the American Civil War. And with that conflict, you had Confederate soldiers charging Federal positions, and the United States Army used cannon on them with grape shot, which basically that's just like pointing a giant shotgun at someone and fired it off. And in one of the accounts from that battle, it was said that, and I quote, whole regiments just disappeared. I mean, there was so big a volume of fire at that point that the attacking Confederate soldiers were just disintegrated. And you didn't see anything like that again until World War I. And then they were mowing people down like they were mowing grass. Some of those machine gunners had to have had nightmares about what they were doing after the war, after they had done that.
Yeah, we have to remember that, let's just take UK as the example. When you think about 6 million men signing up and 3 million actually being involved in the war, there could have been farmhands, people that worked in stores, never been to war in their life, maybe a few at the Boer War, etc., Crimean War, who knows. Even the Maxim, 500 rounds a minute, and probably reached 600 meters. That would have been terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
My God, what have we come into here?
Well, it was, and yes, the armies were recruited in the UK, the same as the States. My grandfather was a farmer, and it was the same again over here. It was farmers and factory workers and men who worked in shops and just ordinary men who were drafted and when their country was called. And these
also young boys that lied about their age. We found out afterwards how many died at 14 and 15 years of age when they were pretending to be 16, 17, It's
Well, that was patriotism.
Of course.
People really felt a love for their countries at that point. Now, Jan, I know we've got another article here. This article, people, was created by Vanda Wilcox, and it's called Combat and the Soldier's Experience in the First World War, and Jan is going to handle this one.
In a war that saw new weaponry technology and great numbers of casualties, Assistant Professor Vanda Wilcox considers the common experiences of soldiers in active combat. The men and women who served in the First World War endured some of the most brutal forms of warfare ever known. Millions were sent to fight away from home for months, even years at a time. They underwent a series of terrible physical and emotional experiences. The new technologies available to the First World War armies, combined with the huge number of men mobilized, made the battlefields of 1914 and 18 horrific, deadly and terrifying places. Technological developments in the late 19th century had made artillery and machine guns extraordinary effective defensive weapons. Creating a deadly zone of fire in front of the defenders' positions, soldiers and labourers were required to dig trenches and machine gun placements, which would protect men from enemy shelling and allow them to fire back at the enemy without exposing themselves to danger. New weapons were introduced during the war, like poison gas in 1915 and tanks in 1916, which made combat more unpredictable. Even before battle began, the experience of life in the lines could be overwhelming. Men were living outside for days and weeks on end with limited shelter from cold, wind, rain and snow in the winter or from the heat and sun in the summer. Artillery destroyed the familiar landscapes, reducing trees and buildings to desolate rubble and churning up endless mud in some areas. The incredible noise of artillery and machine gun fire, both enemy and friendly, were often incessant. Yet soldiers spent a great deal of time waiting around, and in some quiet sectors there was little real fighting, and a kind of informal truce could develop between the two sides.
Yes.
Even in more active parts of the front, battle was rarely continuous, and boredom was common among the troops, with little of the heroism and excitement many had imagined before the war. The Italian infantry officer Emilio Lusso wrote that life in the trenches was grim and monotonous, and that if there were no attacks, there was no war, only hard work. The order to attack or news of an enemy assault changed everything. Men ordered to attack or go over the top had to climb out of the trenches, carrying their weapons and heavy equipment, and move through the enemy's field of fire over complex networks of barbed wire, keeping low to the ground for safety. The objective was to reach the enemy's front line, where the defending troops would be sheltering in their own trenches and use rifles or bayonets to attack them directly. Once the defenders were eliminated, the attacking force seized the position, at least in theory. In reality, these tactics were often unsuccessful and vicious attacks were rare. Casualties were extremely high, with many men killed and wounded. Attackers often suffered higher casualties than defenders. Wounded men were carried or escorted back to field hospitals for treatment, while the dead could only be buried if there was a suitable break in the fighting. Unsurprisingly, going over the top was a terrifying experience for most soldiers. Yet it was that rare that men disobeyed the order to attack. Most First World War troops were generally compliant. What motivated men to fight under such terrible conditions? What kept their morale high despite their fear and physical exhaustion? Traditionally, the authorities believed or hoped that men would be motivated by loyalty to an idea, usually patriotism. French and Serbian soldiers were defending their homeland against invasion, while Britain, German and Austrian soldiers were encouraged to focus on their duty to their king or emperor. These ideas encouraged men to volunteer for military service and could keep their spirits high through long spells of frontline service. But once under fire, men needed more than ideals to maintain their courage. One important explanation for soldiers' resilience is the idea of the primary group. Men were motivated above all by comradeship, as they fought alongside friends and companions. Effective training also helped, making soldiers familiar with the chaos and fear of the battlefield so that their actions in battle became second nature to them. But armies did not leave men's behaviour in battle down to chance. The system of military discipline existed to coerce them into obedience. Punishments for disobeying orders could be severe, and men who were convicted of cowardice in the face of the enemy or desertion from their unit could receive the death sentence. Many hundreds of soldiers were executed by their own armies for military offences during the conflict. Some 60 million soldiers from all over the world served in First World War, fighting in locations varying from France to Iraq, Greece to China, the North Sea to the Pacific Ocean, and experiencing a huge range of types of combat. Yet wherever they fought, the impact of modern technologies combined with the political circumstances of the war made First World War combat a unique and terrible experience. And that's it. And what came to my mind there, Dave, reading that article was, I can't remember how many years ago, it's not that far back, that our men who were executed for cowardice in the First World War was exonerated. Not that it did them any good.
Right.
But at least 3 I read about years back that were sent by their superior officer with a note to run somewhere with the note.
Mm-hmm.
As passing messages, and they were construed as deserters, so they were shot, executed.
One more thing about the trenches, which it was a big component in this war, living in the trenches. It was just extremely awful. Any time it rained, it just turned everything into just a river of mud. The worst thing, really, about the trenches and being in there was sometimes for the wounded, because there were reports of men who actually drowned in the mud in those trenches. And, of course, you had the gas, which was just a horrific type weapon. My grandfather spoke about men who had been hit by mustard gas, and, of course, he had been too. But there were men that came out of that war because of what mustard gas does, because it binds with whatever water there is that comes off of the human body. There were men that obviously were blinded. There were men who came out of that war with no noses and with just holes where their ears used to be. Just living with that as well. This was a horrifying war, and it is a good thing that the countries after that war decided not to use gas, because for one thing, it was a weapon that could, if the wind changed, affect your own troops. And that was something that a lot of people found out to their detriment. But this was a vicious, vicious war. And we owe a great debt to all of our people who went through that hell and did what they did, whether it was for their country, or for king and country, for patriotism, for comradeship, or whatever. I seriously doubt that our young people today who are claiming PTSD because of the 2016 election could have endured that sort of thing.
Yes. I'm sorry for laughing, but I remember reading that post and I'm thinking, they've got PTSD because Mr. Trump became president. I mean, put him in the middle of a war and let them find out what PTSD is.
Exactly. My cousin, Tommy Milner, served with distinction in the Vietnam War. And, of course, I've got other family that served, and so do you. You've got family that served as well. And it's really insulting to have these pukes come out and say, oh, I've got PTSD. You don't even know what PTSD is. No idea. Try coming back from Vietnam with malaria and you're just trying to get through with your life and just go along and work and do what you have to do, but then an attack comes on. And this is years later. And you have to go and lay down for a while because you can't do anything else. That's what malaria does. And my cousin was one of the luckier ones. He didn't have something shot off. He didn't step on an IED and lose a foot or a leg. So for these people to, in the face of people like my cousin and other people who came out of these wars with serious injuries, to whine about having PTSD because their woman didn't win in a stupid election is just massively insulting to me, and I think to any right-thinking person. But we're getting off the track a little bit, but one of the things that we wanted to talk about, folks, was veterans of the First World War lived for quite a long time afterward. And Jan, I know that there's a veteran, the last surviving British veteran of World War I, that you'd like to read about.
Yes, her name was Florence Green. She died 2 weeks before her 111th birthday. She's the world's last surviving First World War veteran. Female, anyway. British. Mrs. Green passed away in her sleep at a care home in Norfolk just 2 weeks before her 111th birthday. The great-grandmother signed up to the Women's Royal... Well, it wasn't the Royal Air Force back then. It was the Royal Air Corps. Women's Royal Air Corps 93 years ago in September 1918 when she was just 17. She was the last surviving person to have served in World War I following the death of British-born sailor Claude Charles in Australia last year. During the First World War, Mrs. Green worked at Narborough Airfield and RAF Marham in Norfolk as an officer's mess steward. Mrs. Green, who was born in London, lived with her daughter May, 90. Imagine having a daughter 90.
Yeah.
In Kings Lynn, Norfolk, but had moved into Briar House Care Home shortly before Christmas, where she died on Saturday. Her family paid tribute to the veteran, describing her as a great woman. Her daughter May said she so nearly made it to her 111th birthday. It is very sad. We are grateful for all the nice tributes. Mrs. Green's younger daughter, June Everts, from Oundle, Northants, 76, said, I'm very proud of her, and she was very proud of the recognition she received. Mrs. Green spent her war days working all hours, serving officers breakfast, lunch and dinner, and would often spend time wandering the base simply admiring the pilots. Oh, my goodness me. Sounds like something I'd do.
It does, doesn't it?
Before her death, she says, I enjoyed my time in the Air Force. There were plenty of people at the airfield where I worked, and they were all very good company. I would work every hour God sent, but I had dozens of friends on the base and we had a great deal of fun in our spare time. In many ways, I had the time of my life. I met dozens of pilots and would go on dates. I had the opportunity to go up in one of the planes, but I was scared of flying. But it was a lovely experience and I'm very proud. Her story came to light after Andrew Holmes, the British correspondent for the US-based Gerontology Research Group, traced her name using the National Archives. Mr. Holmes tracks and validates the ages of people over 110 and also keeps track of British men and women who are older than 107. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. That's nice of you. Mr. Holmes traced further and was surprised to find Florence had joined the WRAF in September 1918, 2 months before the war ended in November 1918. He said it is a common misconception that veterans must be someone who saw action or fighting in the trenches. A veteran is someone who served in one of the armed forces, regardless of their role. A medic, an ambulance driver, or a waitress, they all count. Yes, of course they do. Last May, the only living male First World War combat veteran, British-born sailor Claude Charles, died in Australia at the age of 110. What memories they must have had, Dave, just sitting talking to them. Can you imagine?
Oh, yes. Well, actually, I can. because of my grandfather.
Well, I was my grandfather too. And but I was a child then, and you take some of it in, and he spoke French fluently, and he was in the trenches, but I probably turned my head at that time, being 10-year-old and not interested so much, but RAF squadron leader Paula Wilmot said RAF Marham, where Mrs. Green was stationed for 7 months, would pay its respects to the veteran in true style. We will be supporting the family at the funeral. We are sending a number of our stewards as a tribute to her. And it goes on to say we kept in contact with her just before Christmas to give her a Christmas cake, which she was delighted with. So it's actually amazing that several veterans have gone over the age of 100 years, Dave.
Oh, yes, it is. And we were talking about this, folks, before the show, and it's just coincidental. But there's an American veteran, the last surviving American veteran of World War I who died, was 110 as well. Now, this comes from the New York Slimes, and it is dated February the 28th, 2011. And the headline here is Frank Buckles, last World War I doughboy, is dead at 110. Frank Buckles, who drove an army ambulance in France in 1918 and came to symbolize a generation of embattled young Americans as the last of the World War I doughboys, died on Sunday at his home in Charlestown, West Virginia. He was 110. His death was announced on his website. He was only a corporal, and he never got closer than 30 or so miles to the Western Front trenches. But Mr. Buckles became something of a national treasure as the last living link to the 2 million men who served in the American Expeditionary Forces in France in the War to End All Wars. President Obama said in a statement that Mr. Buckles lived a remarkable life that reminds us of the true meaning of patriotism and our obligations to each other as Americans. Frail, stooped, and hard of hearing, but sharp of mind, Mr. Buckles was named Grand Marshal of the National Memorial Day Parade in Washington in 2007. He was a guest at Arlington National Cemetery on Veterans Day 2007 for wreath-laying ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknowns. He was honored by Defense Secretary Robert M. Gates at the Pentagon and met with President George W. Bush at the White House in March of 2008. United States senators played host to him at the Capitol in June of 2008 for the impending 90th anniversary of the World War I armistice, and he appeared before a Senate subcommittee in December 2009 to support legislation named in his honor to bestow federal status on a World War I memorial on the Washington Mall built in the 1930s. The Department of Veterans Affairs said he would be buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. Sought out for interviews in his final years, Mr. Buckles told of witnessing a ceremony involving British veterans at the Crimean War, fought in the 1850s, when he was stationed in England before heading to France. He remembered chatting with General John J. Pershing, the commander of American troops in World War I, at an event in Oklahoma City soon after the war's end. Now there's a name dropper for you. And he proudly held a sepia-tone photograph of himself in his doughboy uniform when he was interviewed by USA Today in 2007. "I was a snappy soldier," he said, "all gung-ho." Frank Woodruff Buckles was born February the 1st, 1901, on a farm near Bethany, Missouri. He was living in Oakwood, Oklahoma, when the United States entered World War I, and he tried to enlist in the Marine Corps at age 16, having been inspired by recruiting posters. He was one of those that, Jan, that you were talking about, who would willingly lie about his age to get into the war. I mean,
yeah. I wonder how many 15, 16-year-olds would lie about their age to get to war today. Not many.
Oh, no, not many at all. The Marines turned him down as underaged and under the required weight. The Navy did not want him either, saying he had flat feet. But the Army took him in August 1917 after he lied about his age. There you go. And he volunteered to be an ambulance driver, hearing that was the quickest path to service in France. He sailed for England in December 1917 on the Carpathia.
Oh, really? The Carpathia?
Yes, we both know about that one. The Carpathia people, it was another one of the big liners. That was, the Carpathia, the ship that helped save survivors of the Titanic's sinking in 1912. He later served in various locations in France, including Bordeaux, and drove military autos and ambulances. He was moved by the war's impact on the French people. The little French children were hungry, Mr. Buckles recalled in a 2001 interview for the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress. "We'd feed the children. To me, that was a pretty sad sight." Mr. Buckles escorted German prisoners of war back to their homeland after the armistice, then returned to the United States and later worked in the Toronto office of the White Star Shipping Line. There's going full circle for you, Jan.
What an interesting life. What an interesting life, though.
Yes, it was.
Strangely enough, Winston Churchill was refused twice to join military service as a young man.
Yeah. It really is amazing. This guy was was almost a Renaissance man. I mean, just to hear of all of the things that he did. And folks, that's not all of that article, but we're going to have to stop it here because we only have a couple of hours to do this. But he was an amazing man that traveled all over the world. And he was one of those unsung heroes that the article that Jan read talked about. Those people that got the wounded to the hospital tents so that they could be cared for. It's really very amazing.
Just reading up here on mustard gas, I'm trying to find out if it was the first chemical warfare used in the world. I'm not sure. You could die from between 1 and 2 days in normal weather. Mustard gas killed you. But it could go on and kill you slowly, breaking down your body slowly for years.
Yes.
If you lived in a cold country, it took you years to die, but you must have been dying in agony, of course. It was a terrible, terrible thing to use. I'm just reading about that now. It's also a blister agent, and it rots away different parts of the body. It's horrendous. To think that they used something like that in the First World War is amazing.
Oh yes, it creates an acid on your skin, and that's what eats away at it. And I do not know this for certain, but to this day, I think that it must have had something to do with my grandfather's contraction of cancer that eventually killed him in 1980. It was a horrible, horrible weapon, and is well gone from use in almost all conflicts. And we know, of course, that it's been used sporadically here and there since, but never on the scale that it was in the First World War. People, as we move into the Thanksgiving weekend here in the United States of America, among all the other things that we should be thankful for, let us pause and give thanks for those brave people who fought on the side of the Allies in the horrific conflict that was World War I. And in their honor, let us do everything that we can to show respect and to help the veterans still living of today and those current serving. And that is where part 2 will come in next time. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for listening, and may your God go with you. Goodbye. The Unpleasant Blind Guy is copyright 2018. Anno Domini. Now for Dave's Canes. Extras that help you navigate the new media world.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, this is Michael Wright.
And I'm Shannon Wright.
Join us for The Right Way with Shannon and Mike, Monday through Thursday from 7 to 9 a.m. right here on SHR Media.
Why are they joining us?
For fun things like sports, politics.
Oh, maybe some news and entertainment?
And all kinds of other things.
Money and recipes and events, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so join us Monday through Thursday, 7 to 9 a.m. here on shrmedia.com.
From a public locker inside a dilapidated Long Island rail station comes a show designed to piss off liberals using truth, facts, and ridicule. The Lid Radio Show, featuring the conservative voice from the People's Republic of New York, the Lid himself, Jeff Dunitz. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific on the SHR Media Network. Go to shrmedia.com. At Lid Radio, we fight for the truth, justice, and a good kosher T-bone. If you don't listen, Hillary Clinton might sneak into your bedroom in her housecoat late at night and blame you for her election loss. It's the Lid Radio Show with Jeff Dunitz.
It's your business diva here, Melanie Collette. I am inviting you to a front row seat as I discuss some of the most intriguing details of wealth and finance with today's movers and shakers in the world of business. Listen in and discover financial truths on a global, domestic, and household scale. Uncover topics that will impact your wallet today and in the future. Money Talk with Melanie airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. East, 2 p.m. West, right here on SHR Media and High Plains Pundit Talk Radio. You can't afford to miss it.
The new show on the SHR Media Network, Sackheads Against Tyranny. On shrmedia.com. Go there quick like a bunny, 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Wednesday. Live and direct on the SHR Media Network. shrmedia.com. Be there.
I'm Dave Milner. I bring 50 years of news analysis experience to you weekly through SHR Media, High Plains Pundit Talk Radio, and the Western Free Radio Network on the Unpleasant Blind Guy. And catch me on Jeff Mitchell's English Defense League Radio on blogtalkradio.com. There's
no surrender, ever.
Because truth is not always pleasant, like the truth that Arizona Senator John McCain is still dead, and yes, as a senator, he did suck.
Broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California, a mere 2 miles from the state capital, the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show can be heard every Tuesday and Thursday night at 8 p.m. Pacific and 11 p.m. Eastern, only on the SHR Media Network. Go to shrmedia.com to listen. You can also watch on the SHR Media Facebook page and the SHR Media YouTube channel. No goldfish were abused in the making of this ad.
Hey girls, Carry Girl Gear is here. More and more women every day are concealed carrying, participating in competitive shooting, and getting firearms training. It's not a boys' club anymore, and we don't have to shop in their stores anymore either. Finally, a cool and unique clothing line just for women. Dope tees and hats for the patriotic concealed carry and 2A girl. So what are you waiting for? Go check out carrygirlgear.com today.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.